It was 2:45 a.m. when the sound came. Not a timid knock, not the kind of uncertain tapping you hear from a neighbor with a dead car battery. It was heavy, deliberate. 3 strikes against the door like someone marking a kill count. I was awake already, sitting in the dark. Sleep had been a stranger for years. The old instincts flared. In my head, the knock wasn't at my front door. It was at a steel gate deep in a desert war zone, the kind we used to breach with C4. My right hand twitched toward the side table where a pistol sat beneath a folded shirt. Old habits, sealed in bone and blood, never leave you. To our amazing viewers at Midnight Affairs Tales, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know now. Let's dive into today's story, Chapter 1. I moved silently, eyes scanning every shadow in the hallway. The cameras were dead. That was the first red flag. My house runs on redundancies, 2 separate power sources, hardwired surveillance independent from the grid. Whoever was out there knew what they were doing. When I opened the door, my brother Mark wasn't standing anymore. He was falling. A bloom of red spread across his shirt, steaming in the cold air. His eyes found mine just before his knees hit the porch. There was no panic in them, just urgency and a flash of guilt. Then they went still. Behind him, the street was empty. Whoever pulled the trigger had vanished into the night with surgical precision. No headlights, no tires on gravel, nothing but the smell of burned powder clinging to the air. I pulled him inside, my hands already pressing against the wound even though I could feel the absence of a heartbeat. I'd been here before, kneeling over bodies that once meant something, trying to force life back into flesh that was already cooling. Mark wasn't supposed to be here. He lived 3 states away, hated long drives, and never came by unannounced. The last time I saw him, we'd spoken for barely 15 minutes. He'd asked me, in that casual, too careful tone, if everything was okay at home. I brushed it off. Now, there was no brushing anything off. The front of his shirt was torn where he'd been clutching something, and tucked inside was a crumpled scrap of paper. One line, written in hurried, jagged handwriting. She's meeting them tomorrow. Cash from the Italians. I heard everything. There was only one she he could mean. Laura, my wife. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I'd seen betrayal before. In battle, in the field, in the eyes of men who'd promised to watch your 6, and instead lined up their own escape. But betrayal at home, that cuts in a way no combat wound can. Laura had been the anchor after my discharge. When the government decided my years in black operations were over, they erased my file and handed me a medal in a closed room. My codename, Gravekeeper, was locked behind clearance walls, a title no civilian ever knew. She was the only one who saw me stripped of that life, the only one who touched the scars I didn't show anyone else. And now my brother was dead because of her. I closed the blinds, shut off every light, and went straight to the safe. Inside were the tools I swore I'd never use again. Suppress .45, 2 combat knives, a burner phone wrapped in foil, an encrypted flash drive. Each one felt heavier than I remembered, like they carried not just steel but years of bad memories. I replayed Mark's note in my head, isolating the 2 words that mattered, meeting them. The Italians. If Laura was tied to the kind of people Mark meant, then this wasn't about small money. The Italians in this city don't hand out payouts. They pay silencers. Every cent they move comes soaked in someone's blood. But something didn't line up. Laura had no reason to be in their orbit. No gambling debts. No addictions. No criminal record. Which meant one of 2 things. She was either coerced, or she was in it willingly. The second thought almost cracked my composure. I had no proof yet, but proof was a luxury I couldn't wait for. In my world, you don't wait for court dates. You act, and you act clean. I carried Mark's body to the back room, wrapped him in the thick emergency tarp I kept for gear. My hands worked automatically, a soldier's efficiency overriding the ache in my chest. The coroner wouldn't find him. Not until I was ready. His death was my evidence now, and evidence stays close until you use it. By 3:15 a.m., I was in my truck, heading toward the only place I could start. The alley behind a restaurant called Dante's looked like any other service lane. Cracked pavement, a dumpster overflowing with rotting produce. But in the field, we had a saying. If a place looks harmless enough, it's either a sanctuary or a kill zone. Dante's was both. The front served the best pasta in town. The back served as a counting house for the Mancini family, one of the 3 Italian crews running this city. I killed the headlights 2 blocks away, parked, and moved on foot. My boots made no sound on the wet asphalt. Every step brought back the muscle memory of night raids, calculating sight lines, measuring wind, mapping the invisible corridors between light and dark. From the shadows, I watched. At 3:26 a.m., a black sedan rolled in. Out stepped 2 men in tailored coats, both with the slow, relaxed movements of people who know they're untouchable. One lit a cigarette, the other scanned the alley, his hand never far from his coat pocket. And then I saw her. Laura. She wasn't in danger. She wasn't being dragged. She walked right between them, her posture straight, her hair done like she was heading to a meeting she'd been planning for weeks. The taller man opened the back door for her. She stepped inside. The door shut. The sedan pulled out. In the silence that followed, the only thing louder than my heartbeat was the grinding of my teeth. This wasn't coercion. This was partnership. I let the sedan go. Now wasn't the time to follow. In my line of work, tailing a vehicle with 2 professionals inside is a fast way to end up in the river. I needed to know where they were going before they went there again. Back at the house, I laid Mark's note on the table beside my gear. 2 paths branched in front of me. Go straight at the Italians now and risk losing her entirely, or dig deep enough to understand why she was worth their time. The second path was slower, more dangerous, but it was the one that would let me choose how this ended. I powered up the encrypted flash drive. Inside were dormant access keys, favors owed, codes long expired in theory, but still alive in the right corners of government servers. With the right combination, I could ghost my way into financial ledgers, phone logs, even foreign wire transfers. If Laura was moving cash for the Italians, there'd be a trail. Half an hour later, I had my first breadcrumb. A series of deposits in a dormant account under her maiden name. The amounts were irregular, but the dates told a story. The first deposit was 3 weeks ago. The same week, she told me she was going to visit her sister in another state. The final deposit? Scheduled for tomorrow. The same meeting Mark died trying to warn me about. There was no more slow path. If tomorrow was the last payment, it could also be the last time I saw her alive. Or the last time anyone saw me. Because once I stepped back into the skin of the gravekeeper, there's no going halfway. By sunrise, my house no longer felt like mine. It was a sealed perimeter, a staging ground, a place that knew the scent of death now. The tarp-wrapped weight of my brother lay in the back room, and the note he'd carried sat on the table like it was daring me to read it again. Every second I waited was a second Laura's plan moved forward. I didn't know if she had any suspicion that I knew. If she didn't, she was still walking into tomorrow thinking she had control. If she did, then every step I took from now on was into an ambush. Either way, the clock was already ticking. I showered fast, clipped my beard close, and changed into civilian clothes that wouldn't draw attention. Worn jeans, a gray hoodie, plain sneakers. I looked like any man running errands before work, but under the hoodie was a thin ballistic vest, and under the seat of my truck was the suppressed .45. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. The first stop was the storage unit I'd been renting under an alias since leaving the service. Inside was the rest of my kit: night vision, encrypted comms, tracking beacons the size of shirt buttons, and a custom-built rifle broken down into its components. The tools of a life I swore to bury, now laid out in the cold light like they'd been waiting for me. I took the beacons and the rifle. Both would have their moment soon enough. But before I went after the Italians, I had to face her. When I walked through the front door, Laura was in the kitchen. The smell of coffee hung in the air, but my eyes went straight to the faint smear of something dark on the floor near the sink. Not coffee grounds. Not food. Blood, a small drop, dried, nearly missed unless you were trained to spot the smallest deviation in a scene. My gut tightened. It could have been Mark's. If she had been here when it happened, it meant more than betrayal. It meant she'd stood in the same house as my brother's killer. Her eyes met mine, calm, but a fraction too controlled. If you've interrogated enough people, you learn the micro-expressions, the tightness at the corners of the mouth, the calculated blink rate. She was wearing a mask. In another life, I would have asked her where she'd been last night. Now I knew better. Asking wasn't for answers. It was for tipping your hand, and mine needed to stay buried. I crossed the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and acted like the man she still thought I was. But every sense I had was reading her. The faint smell of a perfume she didn't wear for me. The clean nails but faint scuff on her left shoe like she'd been in a dirty alley. She was already preparing for tomorrow. I needed to make sure I was closer to her than anyone else when she walked into that meeting. After she left for errands, I shadowed her from 3 cars back. Tailing someone you've shared a bed with is a strange thing. Every turn feels personal. Every red light feels like a test. She didn't spot me. At least, not yet. She drove south, away from her supposed errands, into a part of town where the Italians ran their low-profile fronts. Pawn shops, small-time betting parlors, import-export warehouses. She parked behind an unmarked building with blacked-out windows. I stayed in the shadows, watched her knock on a side door with a rhythm that wasn't random. Someone opened from the inside. She went in. The man who opened the door was someone I knew from another life. Vince Rocco. Former enforcer, now a mid-tier player in the Mancini family. Last time I saw him, he was in the back of an armored truck in Kandahar, working a contract job for a company that didn't exist on paper. He was brutal then. I doubted time had softened him. If she was meeting Vince, this was more than a cash handoff. This was operational, which meant she wasn't just running errands for them. She was in the architecture of something bigger. I stayed on her trail when she left 40 minutes later, but didn't follow her home. I had enough for today. Enough to know that tomorrow's meeting wasn't the end game. It was a middle step in something with far deeper roots. Back at the house, I sat in front of my laptop and built a map. Laura's movements over the last 3 weeks. Known Mancini assets. Dead drops and safe houses I knew from my time in covert work. The threads started to connect. Too many of the addresses were within blocks of shipping lanes. That wasn't coincidence. That was trafficking, weapons, drugs, maybe people. And if she was running money in that ecosystem, she wasn't a side player. She was a trusted node, which meant the Italians trusted her more than they should. And that trust could be used against them. But before I could move, I had to deal with the body in my back room. Mark wasn't going to vanish on his own. At 2 a.m., I loaded him into the truck bed under a tarp and drove to the old quarry 12 miles out of town. The place was abandoned, flooded in parts, and the locals avoided it. I worked under the red beam of a headlamp, lowering his wrapped body into the deepest section of water, weighed down with cinder blocks. It was not the burial he deserved, but it was the safest place until I could bring justice to the people who put him here. On the way back, my burner phone buzzed. No number. Just a text. We know you've been watching. Stop, or she dies early. No signature. No bluff. They were already onto me. The game had just shifted. Tomorrow wasn't just the day I confronted Laura. It was the day I walked straight into the crosshairs of a family that had just marked me as a problem. And the worst part? They still didn't know my code name. The text on the burner phone didn't scare me. It reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Fear isn't what keeps you alive in this world. Control is. The kind of control that slows your heartbeat when most men would panic. The kind that turns noise into patterns and danger into opportunity. If the Mancinis were watching me, that meant they'd assigned someone to keep eyes on my movements. That meant there was a chain of communication. And in any chain, there's always a weakest link. I didn't reply to the text. Never acknowledge, never confirm. That's how you stay ahead. Instead, I used the rest of the night preparing for tomorrow. My loadout was lean and silent. Suppressed .45 with subsonic rounds. 2 tracking beacons. Lock bypass kit small enough to fit in a cigarette case. Compact night vision monocular. A 3-inch blade with a blackened finish, sharp enough to part bone from tendon. I didn't need more. Anything heavier would slow me down, and the kind of places I'd be going didn't welcome a man carrying too much. By 8 a.m., I was parked across the street from a low-rent diner near the waterfront, the kind of place the Mancinis used for pre-meeting checks. From the back booth, I had a clear line of sight to the alley behind it. At 8:13, Laura arrived. Not alone. Vince Rocco was with her, and a man I didn't recognize. Early 40s, clean suit, hair cropped to regulation, and a walk that screamed military before it screamed criminal. This one wasn't just muscle. He was trained. My guess. Special forces, maybe even agency. They went inside. I stayed put. There was no risk following them in, yet. I wasn't here to hear what they said. I was here to see who followed them out. At 8:48, a different man left the diner. Younger. Nervous. Wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big. He wasn't one of them. He was one of mine. A spotter. The Mancinis had eyes running perimeter security, making sure no one tailed their people. That meant tomorrow's meeting was important enough to warrant counter-surveillance. He walked past my truck without looking in. I waited until he was a block ahead before following on foot. We moved through side streets and into a part of the dockyard where the smell of salt water mixed with diesel and rust. The spotter turned into an old warehouse. I didn't follow him inside. Not yet. Instead, I doubled back, checked angles, and found an access point on the roof. The roof gave me a perfect view into the upper windows. Inside, I saw exactly what I was hoping for. A table with comms gear, a laptop running feeds from portable cameras, and a printed map of the city with tomorrow's meeting location circled in red. But it wasn't just the meeting point that was marked. There were 3 smaller circles around it, staging areas. That meant layered security, which meant if I just walked into tomorrow blind, I wouldn't get close enough to breathe the same air as Laura before they took me apart. I snapped a photo of the map through the monocular. Then I planted the first tracking beacon under the warehouse's drainage lip. It would ping me if they moved their surveillance hub before tomorrow. When I came down from the roof, the air felt different. Not colder, heavier. That's when I saw him. Same man from the diner. Ex-military. Standing in the alley, hands in his pockets, watching me with the kind of stillness that only comes from men who've been in kill houses before. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. His eyes were telling me he knew exactly who I was. Or at least, who I used to be. I walked past him. Slow. Unrushed. Like we were 2 strangers crossing in a dead city. He didn't follow me. Which told me everything. He wasn't here to kill me. He was here to measure me. By the time I got back to the truck, my phone buzzed again. Different number. Gravekeeper. Long time. Only a handful of people alive knew that name. All of them were supposed to be retired, dead, or locked so deep in the system they couldn't even whisper it. Whoever this was, they weren't just part of the Mancinis. They were running something parallel to them. And Laura, she was tied into both worlds. I drove out of the docks and straight to my storage unit. I needed more than gear now. I needed intel that hadn't seen daylight in years. At the back of the unit, inside a locked trunk, was a small steel box. Inside the box, laminated photos of people I'd worked with in black operations, men and women who didn't officially exist. One of them, a man named Cole Ward, had the same eyes as the one in the diner. Cole had been a ghost asset, a deniable operator we'd use when even the agency didn't want fingerprints. Last I'd heard, he'd been burned in South America. But now he was here, working alongside a Mafia family and my wife. That wasn't coincidence. That was design. If Cole was running tomorrow's meeting, then the Italians weren't just paying for protection. They were part of something bigger, something with the same black-budget fingerprints I thought I'd left behind. Which meant Laura's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was tactical. Tomorrow wasn't just about her. Tomorrow was about tying off a loose and named me. And the worst part? If Cole was in charge, they already had contingencies for when I showed up. But I had something they didn't. The kind of patience that comes from sitting in the dark for 10 hours, breathing through cloth, waiting for a man to step into your crosshairs. They wanted the gravekeeper back. They'd get him, just not in the way they were expecting. The thing about files like Cole Ward's is that they're not just buried, they're encased. Layers of false flags, scrambled identifiers, and sealed databases so deep you can drown in the attempt. The trick isn't breaking in. It's knowing which door to knock on without the whole house collapsing on top of you. I didn't go to any system you could access from a home connection. I went to something older, an offline drive I'd built back when my life was nothing but missions and contingency plans. I'd scraped it from backdoor ports and military comms, patched it together with scraps from agency cleanups. It wasn't perfect, but it held ghosts the government swore didn't exist. Cole Ward's ghost was in there. His file read like a cautionary tale. Born in Wyoming, recruited straight out of Ranger School, folded into a joint task unit that didn't have a name. 6 confirmed black operations across Eastern Europe, 5 denials, 1 mission marked Class 0 clearance, which meant it never officially happened. And then nothing. Burn notice issued 5 years ago. Allegedly dead in a car bombing in Bogota. Except now he was very much alive and working with the Mancinis. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the few unredacted fragments from his financial history with movement logs from my old network. That's when the pattern hit me. The Mancini payment routes matched old covert smuggling lanes we'd used for moving untraceable hardware across borders. Not drugs, not cash, military tech, the kind that doesn't show up in public budgets. If Laura was inside that machine, she wasn't just collecting Mafia payouts. She was a key operator in a black market supply chain feeding both organized crime and black budget war zones. And my brother? He hadn't just stumbled onto a family betrayal. He'd overheard something that could sink an entire covert pipeline. That's why he died. The rage came fast, hot, and clean. Not the messy kind that blinds you. This was the focused kind, the kind you can build a plan around. I didn't care about the bigger picture anymore. Not the geopolitics. Not the shadow wars. I cared about dismantling the people who thought they could use my wife to bleed me out and leave me in a quarry like yesterday's problem. But I knew better than to kick in a door without knowing the layout inside. Cole would be running tomorrow like a military op. That meant I needed to take something from him tonight. I knew where to start. The beacon I'd planted at the warehouse pinged twice in the last hour. That meant they'd move their gear. And if they moved their gear, there'd be a trail. I followed it. The warehouse alley was quiet, too quiet. No guards outside. No spotters on the roof. That told me the real action was happening somewhere else. I went in low, night vision cutting through the dark. Inside, the room was stripped. No comms gear, no map, no paper trail. But they'd left behind something more valuable than intel. Blood. A smear near the door, fresh enough to glisten under the IR light. Not a kill. A fight. Which meant someone had been here before me and made it out alive. I followed it to the back exit, where the smear ended at tire tracks, fresh, deep, and heading toward the waterfront. Someone else was playing in my sandbox. I tailed the tracks through the industrial grid until they ended at a storage lot for shipping containers. Most were locked, stacked, and silent. One wasn't. Its lock was broken, the door slightly ajar. Inside, I found a man tied to a chair. Beaten, bleeding, breathing. He wasn't Mancini muscle, too thin, too twitchy, too scared. My guess, a courier. The kind who carries messages when you don't trust phones. His right hand was missing 2 fingers. That was a signature I knew. Cole Ward's work. The courier's eyes locked on me, recognition mixing with desperation. I didn't untie him. I didn't need him running and blowing my cover. Instead, I searched his pockets. What I found was worth more than his life. A small metal case with 3 flash drives inside. Each was tagged with dates. One of them matched tomorrow's meeting. I slipped the drives into my pocket and left him there. I wasn't here to save anyone. Not tonight. Back at my unit, I plugged the drives into an air-gapped laptop. What I saw was worse than I expected. Full manifests of weapons shipments moving through the Mancini routes, with U.S. military serials intact. Anti-armor systems. Surface-to-air launchers. Things you don't want in the hands of criminals or insurgents. And every manifest had the same signature at the bottom. LC, cleared, and confirmed. Laura. Her betrayal wasn't some last-minute sellout. She'd been in this for months, maybe years. I'd been sleeping next to someone who was quietly arming the kind of people I used to haunt. Now I understood the text on my burner. They weren't warning me off because I was sniffing around the Mancinis. They were warning me because I was getting too close to burning down something the government itself might still be feeding. But I wasn't backing off. I pulled up Cole's last confirmed ops in Europe. His method was always the same. Build a false meeting point, choke the target's options, hit them with a coordinated triangle of fire. Tomorrow, he'd do it again. But tomorrow, I'd be in his blind spot before he even set the first perimeter. I loaded the rifle, cleaned the .45, and packed the second beacon. Tomorrow wasn't going to be about gathering intel. It was going to be about removing Cole Ward from the map. And once Cole was gone, the rest would start to unravel. Because without their Black Ops handler, the Mancinis would just be another crime family pretending they could play in my world. They were about to learn the hard way what happens when you wake the Gravekeeper. The morning felt colder than it should have. Not the weather, the air. It had that sterile, pre-mission taste. The kind you get when the world around you slows down, and every movement, every sound, every shadow feels like it's telling you something. By 4:15 a.m., I was in position. Not close enough to be seen, but close enough to see everything. The meeting was set for 9 a.m. at a waterfront office building the Mancinis kept under a false leasing company. On paper, it was a maritime freight brokerage. In reality, it was one of their central clearing points, where money, goods, and information passed hands without touching the street. Cole Ward would have layered the security. He never relied on a single perimeter. That meant spotters, choke points, and fallback routes. I'd studied his patterns all night, mapping the triangle he liked to build. At 4:45, the first vehicle arrived, a nondescript van. 2 men unloaded crates, but the crates weren't for storage. I caught the faint metallic sheen of rifle barrels through the slats. They were setting up overwatch positions inside the building. By 6 o'clock, a black SUV took the rear lot. A woman stepped out first. Laura, my wife. She was dressed sharp, precise, navy blazer, hair pinned, no wasted movement. She carried herself like someone stepping into a boardroom, not a criminal negotiation. But I could see the difference now. She wasn't my Laura anymore. She was the LC on the manifests. The woman who could greenlight weapons into the hands of people who didn't deserve them. And I could see something else. She wasn't nervous. If anything, she looked invested. 2 men flanked her, one of them Vince Rocco, the other a face I didn't recognize. He had the dead-eyed calm of a man who could kill without flinching. They disappeared inside. I moved from my first observation point, an abandoned trawler anchored just off the dock, to a secondary position across the street in a boarded-up seafood shop. From here, I had line of sight into the top floor through a narrow gap in the blinds. Inside, I counted 7 people: Laura, Vince, Cole, 3 armed guards, and an older man with silver hair and a presence that screamed hierarchy. This was a Mancini higher-up. He didn't show up for just anything. Cole paced while the silver-haired man spoke. Every few seconds, Laura would slide a folder across the table or point to a section on a chart. She wasn't a passenger in this meeting. She was steering it. I checked my watch. 9:17. If Cole followed his old playbook, the next phase would be about locking down the area. That meant in 15 minutes, every possible approach would be cut off, which gave me 15 minutes to get inside without being flagged. I slipped out of the seafood shop and moved through the alleys, staying in the blind arcs between the overwatch angles I'd identified earlier. At the rear of the building, I found the service entrance. The lock bypass kit was in my hand before my brain even told it to be. 6 seconds, and I was in. The first floor smelled like oil and salt water. The hum of machinery echoed through the walls. I moved up the side stairwell, avoiding the main steps where I knew they'd have a man posted. On the 3rd floor landing, I paused. A shadow moved past the frosted glass door ahead. Guard. I waited until his footsteps faded toward the front, then slid through and into a storage room. From here, I could hear them. Not the words, but the rhythm. Cole's voice was clipped, authoritative. Laura's was steady, answering him without hesitation. The silver-haired man's voice was slower, deliberate, the kind of voice that only spoke when a decision had been made. I eased toward the sound until I could see them through a crack in the door. Laura was holding a black satchel. She unzipped it, revealing neat stacks of cash and something metallic, a flash drive identical to the ones I'd taken from the courier. She handed it to Cole. He didn't even check the contents. He slid it into his jacket and handed her a sealed envelope. That was when I knew this wasn't just a payoff. This was an exchange of information, something that went both ways. Before I could read the play, a ripple moved through the room. One of the guards touched his earpiece, murmured something, and Cole's head snapped toward the door. They knew someone was here. I moved back into the storage room, quiet as breath, and slid behind a stack of crates. Heavy boots entered seconds later, scanning, checking corners. One passed within 3 feet of me, his rifle hanging loose. If he'd been trained like I was, he would have cleared every inch. But he wasn't. When he turned, I stepped out, blade in hand, and opened his throat before he could form a sound. I caught him as he fell, easing him to the ground. No time for cleanup. I needed eyes on that satchel before it left the building. From the crack in the storage door, I saw Laura and Cole stand. They shook hands with the silver-haired man. Laura didn't look nervous, didn't glance around. She thought she was safe. She didn't see me watching. I stayed still as they moved toward the stairs. Cole led. Vince followed. Laura was last. That gave me one chance. Take the satchel before they reached the first floor, or lose whatever was inside forever. I stepped into the hall, slow, timing my move with the moment Laura's heel hit the top stair. My hand was inches from the satchel strap when a voice from below froze me. It was Cole. He didn't shout. He didn't aim. He just said one word. Gravekeeper. And the stairwell went silent. Cole's voice was like a hammer breaking glass in my chest. Not because he knew my code name. I'd already guessed he would, but because of how he said it. Calm. Confident. Like he wasn't just acknowledging I was there, but that he'd been expecting me. Laura froze on the stair above me, the strap of the satchel still hanging from her shoulder. Vince's hand hovered near his jacket. The guards were a floor down, just out of sight, but close enough to swarm if the order came. The air felt like it thickened, turning the stairwell into a narrow, vertical kill box. I'd been in plenty of them before. Urban choke points where a single mistake turns into a cascade of death. Cole stepped into view from below, his hands loose at his sides. No weapon drawn yet. He didn't need one. He knew every exit was already locked, every angle covered. You've been sloppy, his tone seemed to say without words. You shouldn't be here. But that's the thing about people who think they know your playbook. They never prepare for the page you tore out years ago. I moved first. My left hand snapped the satchel strap off Laura's shoulder before she could react, and my right hand hit the smoke grenade I'd palmed from my vest. It dropped between us, filling the stairwell with a dense, stinging haze. Cole barked an order, and the building came alive with movement. Boots on metal, safeties clicking off, men shouting to cover angles. I didn't run down. I didn't run up. I went sideways. The storage room door on the landing was already ajar from my earlier move. I dove through it, slid behind the crates, and punched out the window with my elbow. Glass fell to the dock below in sparkling shards. I didn't hesitate. I went through. The fall was only 2 stories, but enough to knock the breath out of most people. I landed hard, rolled, and came up moving, the satchel clutched tight. Bullets punched the siding above me, chipping wood, the sound sharp and metallic in the morning air. I cut across the dock, weaving between rusted bollards and coiled ropes. The first pursuit came fast. 2 of Cole's men, rifles up, trained but overeager. I ducked behind a cargo container, drew the suppressed .45, and waited. When they rounded the corner, I put one round in the first man's chest, another in the second's head. Both went down before their fingers even tightened on the trigger. I was moving again before they hit the deck. The satchel wasn't light. Cash had weight, but the flash drive inside was what mattered. I reached the far end of the dock and dropped to a lower service walkway, running parallel to the waterline. Above me, I could hear Cole's voice cutting through the chaos, directing fire, repositioning his shooters. He wasn't panicked. He was hunting. I needed to vanish. Halfway along the walkway, I found what I was looking for, a maintenance hatch leading into the storm drain system. I pried it open, slid inside, and dropped into darkness. The water was cold, the air damp, but it was a perfect artery out of the area. I moved fast through the tunnels, counting turns by instinct, until I surfaced in a drainage ditch a mile away. Only then did I open the satchel. The cash was bundled tight, but I pushed it aside for the envelope. Inside were photographs, high-resolution shots of weapons shipments, security convoys, and a few unfamiliar faces. On the back of each photo was a location and a date. Every location was an international port. Every date was within the next 2 weeks. This wasn't just a single deal. It was a schedule, a distribution map for military-grade weapons moving across borders under Mafia cover. And Laura had just handed it to Cole, which meant Cole wasn't just running the Mancini's logistics. He was linking them directly into an international arms network. And now I had their playbook. But here's the part that didn't sit right. If Cole knew I was in the building, why hadn't he locked it down tighter? Why let me get away with the satchel? Unless he'd let me. I replayed the moment in the stairwell in my head. The way Cole had been positioned, the fact that Laura hadn't screamed, the precision of their timing. It hit me like a cold wave. They wanted me to take the satchel, which meant the schedule inside might not be the real one. It might be bait, a way to pull me into a kill zone of their choosing. And if that was true, then Laura wasn't just a player in Cole's plan. She was the lure. The satchel suddenly felt heavier in my hands. Not from the weight of cash, but from the weight of the choice it carried. I could burn it now, walk away, disappear into the kind of anonymity that men like Cole could never touch. Or I could take the bait, step into his kill zone, and flip it before he ever saw the trigger pulled. And I already knew which one I'd choose. Because Cole Ward wasn't going to get to write the ending to my story. If Cole Ward wanted me to walk into his trap, I'd give him the courtesy. But not the outcome. Men like Cole count on predictable behavior. They rely on you thinking the way they'd think, on you walking the route they've set. They never imagine you'll step onto their board and start flipping pieces before the game even begins. The satchel was still wet from the storm drain when I laid it out on the table of my storage unit. I studied every photo again, this time looking not at the faces or the dates, but the edges, the things you only notice when you stop caring about the obvious. The timestamps on the back weren't consistent. Some were printed, some handwritten. A few had faint water stains that didn't match the rest. And then I saw it, a pattern in the serial numbers on the weapon crates. Every third digit was off by 1, like someone had altered them just enough to throw off a database search. This wasn't the real schedule. It was a mask, which meant the real schedule existed somewhere else, and the only way to find it was to follow the fake one until it intersected with the truth. And that gave me my first target. One of the listed drop points was an old cannery on the South Pier, marked for a delivery in 24 hours. If Cole's trap was in motion, the cannery wouldn't just be a delivery site, it would be one of his choke points. That made it perfect. By 10 p.m. that night, I was in position 2 blocks from the cannery. The building was a shell, its corrugated siding rusted and buckling, the windows dark. But the street around it wasn't empty. 2 sedans parked opposite each other, both with silhouettes in the driver's seat. Not Mafia Street thugs. Too still. Too focused. Cole's men. I didn't approach from the street. I circled wide, cutting through the yard of an abandoned shipwright's shop, climbing over a chain-link fence, and moving along the cannery's blind side. From here, the only eyes on me were rats and ghosts. Inside, the air stank of salt, mold, and old fish. My boots made no sound on the rotted boards as I moved toward the loading area. That's where I found the first surprise. A crate already open, its contents laid out like a display. Anti-material rifle. For sealed cases of fragmentation grenades. And tucked in the corner, a military-issue portable jammer. That last one was the tell. The jammer meant Cole wasn't just guarding the shipment. He was cutting off any chance of remote communication. If the cannery was the bait, then once I stepped into the kill box, no one outside could hear me. But Cole had underestimated one thing. I wasn't here to survive his trap. I was here to set mine inside his. I planted the first charge under the open crate, a small-shaped device that would shred the contents and ignite anything combustible nearby. Then I moved up to the rafters, planted 2 more along the main support beams. The moment Cole's men walked into their own warehouse, I dropped the building on top of them. I waited in the dark until I heard the first vehicle arrive. Doors slammed. Voices murmured below. Heavy boots on the floor. I counted 5 men. Then 6. Then 7. Too many for just a pickup. That's when I saw her. Laura. She walked in behind Cole, the satchel from yesterday gone, replaced with a slim black case. She didn't look around. Didn't seem nervous. She was part of this. Fully integrated into his operation. They stopped near the open crate. Cole gave an order, and 2 men began inspecting the weapons. Another placed the black case on the crate and opened it. I couldn't see what was inside, and I didn't get the chance, because the faintest click echoed through the rafters above me, the sound of a safety being switched off. I turned my head slowly, and there he was, one of Cole's shooters, perched in the shadows across from me, rifle trained on my chest. He'd been here the whole time, waiting for me to reveal myself. Cole's voice rose from below, sharp and cold. "Come down, Gravekeeper." The shooter didn't move. Neither did I, but I did smile. Because in the shadows behind the shooter, I saw the red blink of my remote detonator's armed light. One flick of my thumb, and the first charge went off. The crate below erupted in a burst of fire and splinters, the shockwave staggering everyone within 10 feet. I rolled off the beam as the second and third charges blew, tearing through the rafters, sending steel and timber crashing down. The shooter across from me dropped his rifle and grabbed for balance, but I was already moving, crossing the gap, catching him by the vest, and throwing him into the void below. The cannery became chaos. Shouting, gunfire, the crack of beams splitting under strain. I hit the ground running, weaving between debris and choking smoke, the .45 in my hand. 2 of Cole's men came at me from the side. I dropped them both with chest shots before they could raise their weapons. Laura was gone. Cole was gone. They'd slipped out the moment the first blast hit. The only thing left was the black case, lying open on the floor, its contents half spilled, and that's when I saw it. Inside were not weapons, not cash, but passports. Dozens of them, all with different names, different nationalities. All with Laura's photo. She wasn't just his partner. She was his ghost, his courier, his infiltrator. And that meant she wasn't working for Cole. She was working with him. The cannery burned behind me, its black smoke curling into the night like a signal flare only the right kind of eyes would read. The fire was spreading fast, not enough to draw the full attention of the city yet, but enough to force Cole to cut the operation short. The passports were still in my hands, warm from the flames, the laminated covers slick under my fingers. Dozens of identities, all built around one woman's face. Laura wasn't just a runner. She was the kind of asset you plant deep inside multiple worlds. Someone who could walk through customs, sit in a government building, or disappear into a crowd in any country she wanted. And she'd done it for him. I didn't keep the whole stack. I took 3, enough to hurt her mobility, but not enough for her to realize it until it mattered. The rest I left behind, tucked under a half-collapsed beam where the fire would burn hot enough to melt their plastic and destroy their value. Cole had been expecting me to take his bait, follow the schedule, and walk into his kill box. Instead, I'd burned his infrastructure, taken his most valuable travel tools, and left him thinking I'd gotten exactly what he wanted me to have. The false schedule in the satchel was still my next move, but not in the way Cole imagined. If I followed it openly, he'd watch me, hunt me, herd me where he wanted. So instead, I'd seed my movements with enough noise to make him believe I was falling into his pattern while moving in the exact opposite direction. The first step was creating that noise. By midnight, I was at a public terminal in the corner of a 24-hour bus station, logging into a series of dark forum accounts I'd built years ago for intelligence smokescreens. From each account, I leaked fragments of the false schedule, just enough to make small-time smugglers, scavengers, and rival crews start sniffing around the listed locations. In Cole's position, that was a nightmare. If too many eyes showed up at his drop points, he'd have to either scrub the op or accelerate it. Either way, it forced him to move. And movement meant vulnerability. The trick with a man like Cole is not to hit him where he's strong. It's to make him fight on two fronts. One he sees, one he doesn't. By 2 a.m., I had my second move in motion. I planted the second tracking beacon, this one not under a building or on a vehicle, but in a place Cole couldn't avoid, the lining of the satchel he thought I'd escaped with. He didn't know I'd already replaced it with an identical copy. He'd take it from me eventually. He was meant to, and when he did, he'd carry it straight into whatever hole he thought was safe. And I'd follow. The third step was personal. I used one of the stolen passports, a Canadian identity with Laura's face but the name Claire Turner, to pass through a small checkpoint at the edge of the city where the river met the industrial sprawl. The guards didn't give me a second look. I wasn't there to leave. I was there to meet someone. A contact named Harris. Former signals tech from a covert unit we both knew never existed. He owed me his life from a bad night in Belgrade, and I knew he kept eyes on certain channels even after his so-called retirement. I gave him the passport and a simple instruction: get it flagged at every major customs database in the hemisphere. Quietly. That way, the next time Laura tried to use it, it would ping a watch list she didn't even know existed. He didn't ask why. In our world, the fewer questions, the longer you live. By dawn, the game board had shifted. Reports were already trickling into the channels I monitored, movement at 2 of the false schedule's drop points. Cole's men were reacting fast, pulling resources from one location to reinforce another. That's when I made my real move. While they were tied up chasing ghosts, I went for one location that wasn't on the schedule at all, a storage yard on the far east side of the city. I'd seen it in the background of one of the photos in the satchel, barely visible behind a weapons crate. To anyone else, it was nothing. To me, it was a marker, a place they were using as a quiet staging hub between real drops. The yard was fenced, the gate locked. Easy problems. I slipped through, found the low, windowless building at the back, and picked the door. Inside were 3 trucks, all loaded with identical black cases. I opened one. Inside, encrypted comm units. The kind you can't buy on the open market. They weren't for the Mafia. They were for field operators, people who needed to coordinate without satellites, without oversight. This was the communications backbone of Cole's network. Without it, his crews would be blind. I didn't destroy them. Not yet. I tagged each one with microtracers, smaller than a coin. If they spread these units to other cells, I'd have eyes on the whole web. By the time I left the yard, I knew I'd flipped the game. Cole thought he was tightening the net around me. In reality, every step he took now would pull me deeper into his system, mapping it from the inside. And Laura? She'd be moving too, because Cole would want her close for whatever came next. Which meant sooner or later, they'd both walk me straight to the real heart of their operation. And when they did, I wouldn't be the one in the trap. There's a rhythm to being hunted. Most people panic under it. They start moving faster, making sloppy choices, leaving trails they can't cover. But for someone like me, it's just another kind of battlefield. Only the lines are invisible, and the traps are psychological as much as physical. Cole Ward thought he was driving me toward a choke point. He thought the satchel in my possession, the false schedule inside, and the staged sightings at the drop points would pin me exactly where he wanted me. But every time he moved a piece, I was already 2 squares over. I saw the first shift in his pattern the next morning. The chatter in the encrypted channels I'd tapped through the tag comm units changed tone, shorter messages, faster exchanges, tighter phrasing. That's the sign of a hunt in progress. Someone had eyes on me, or thought they did. I gave them just enough to believe it. At 9 a.m., I walked into a greasy spoon diner in the South District, the kind of place the Mancinis used to meet mid-tier runners. I ordered coffee, sat by the window, and made sure to check my watch twice in plain view of the security camera across the street. It wouldn't take long for Cole's people to see the footage and confirm my location. I left 5 minutes later, cut through an alley, and disappeared into the bones of the city, old utility tunnels no one had touched since the Cold War. From there, I moved to an entirely different quadrant, one they couldn't connect to the sighting without burning time they didn't have. While they were repositioning, I followed the beacon I'd planted in the duplicate satchel. It was moving. Fast. Eastbound. They'd taken the bait. I shadowed its signal from 2 blocks out, careful to never get closer than the edge of my range. The route was textbook, weaving through side streets, stopping twice for counter-surveillance. Cole was moving it personally. That meant he thought whatever was in there was worth guarding, even if it was the fake. By early afternoon, the beacon stopped moving at an old meatpacking plant on the outskirts. The place had been gutted years ago, now a skeleton of rusted beams and shattered glass. But the fence was new. The padlocks were new. This wasn't just a waypoint. It was a staging site. From a rooftop across the street, I glassed the building through the scope. Cole was there, pacing near the loading dock. 4 guards outside, 2 on the roof. And Laura. She wasn't shadowing him anymore. She was standing at his side, talking, pointing at something in a folder. Her body language had changed since the Waterfront, sharper, more commanding. She wasn't just following orders. She was giving them. That told me something important. This wasn't a hierarchy of Cole above Laura. This was a partnership. And if she had equal weight in this operation, then she had equal exposure. They stayed there for 40 minutes before Cole gave a signal. The guards moved to load a truck. Laura climbed into the passenger seat of an SUV. The beacon was still inside. When they pulled out, I let them get 3 blocks ahead before tailing. They didn't know it, but I wasn't after the fake schedule anymore. I was after where they went when they thought the hunt was ending. We drove for nearly an hour into the hills north of the city, where the roads narrowed and the tree line closed in. Finally, they turned into a long gravel drive that ended at a lodge-like building, wood and stone, built into the slope, big enough to house 20 men. The kind of place you use when you want isolation, security, and the ability to see trouble coming from a mile out. I didn't get closer than the tree line. I marked every guard, every camera, every blind spot. This wasn't a safe house. It was the house, the core of their operation. I also saw something else. In the clearing behind the lodge were 3 cargo containers. The numbers on them matched the altered serials from the false schedule. That meant my hunch was right. The fake route wasn't meant to protect the real one. It was meant to hide the consolidation point. Everything they were moving ended up here before it disappeared overseas. And now I had the address. I didn't attack. Not yet. Taking down an operation like this meant timing. Cole had numbers, heavy weapons, and the high ground. But he also had one vulnerability, his overconfidence. I knew he'd be expecting me to come for the lodge eventually. I also knew he'd think the fight would happen here, on his terms. So instead, I'd drag him out. The first move was to bleed the edges. Over the next 48 hours, I hit 3 of their smaller outposts in the city, quick, surgical strikes. I burned cash reserves, destroyed vehicles, and planted enough false evidence to make it look like rival crews were moving in on them. Cole would have to respond. He'd have to stretch his resources thin to protect his revenue streams. And the thinner he stretched, the more gaps he'd leave. By the end of the second night, the chatter on the comm units was exactly what I wanted: frantic, scattered, reactive. They thought they were closing in on me. But in reality, every step they took was pulling them further away from safety, closer to the point where I'd break them. And Laura, she was still at the lodge, which meant when I came for it, she wouldn't be watching me through a scope or hearing about me over the radio. She'd be looking me in the eyes. The lodge sat in the hills like a scar that had learned to hide itself. From a distance, it looked like a hunting retreat, cedar siding, big glass windows, and a wide deck facing the valley. But under the surface, I could feel its real purpose. The security patterns were military. The guard rotations were disciplined. The vehicles in the lot were all less than 2 years old, maintained with precision. Cole Ward hadn't built this place to entertain guests. He'd built it to disappear things, weapons, people, evidence, and to keep those disappearances invisible. 3 nights after I first found it, I made my move. Not to hit them. Not yet. Tonight was about reconnaissance that no satellite could give me. I used the creek that ran down the slope to approach from below, water masking my movement and the thermal signature. The trees thinned near the retaining wall, and there I found my entry, a utility tunnel built for drainage, its grate padlocked but rusting. A pair of silent bolt cutters took care of that. Inside, The tunnel led to a sub-basement under the lodge. The concrete was clean. Too clean. There wasn't a trace of dust, as if the place was scrubbed regularly. That told me there was something worth hiding down here. The first door I found was heavy steel with a biometric lock. I didn't have the scanner for it, but I had something better: patience. I waited in the shadows until I heard footsteps and the faint click of the lock opening from the inside. A guard stepped through, carrying a stack of folders. I took him down silently. Arm around the neck, twist, lower him to the floor. The keycard in his pocket opened the door. The room beyond wasn't what I expected. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, but in the center stood a reinforced table with a single book on it. Leather-bound, old, its pages thick. The moment I opened it, I knew why it was guarded. It was a ledger, but not like any ledger I'd seen before. This wasn't just numbers. It was a record of transactions, dates, amounts, shipment details, each one cross-referenced with initials. Some of those initials matched Mancini family lieutenants. Others didn't belong to any criminal I'd ever heard of. They belonged to people I knew from my own past. Operators, black budget assets, ghosts who were supposed to be buried deep enough that no law, no agency, no journalist could ever drag them into the light. Cole's Lodge wasn't just the heart of the Mancini's arms network. It was a bridge, a place where covert U.S. operatives and organized crime traded in the same currency. And Laura's initials were all over it. Not just on the recent entries, either. Her mark went back years. Long before I thought anything was wrong. Long before I thought she'd even met Cole. I flipped to the most recent pages. The last 5 entries weren't just weapons or cash transfers. They were movements of people, extraction and relocation, each one tied to a passport photo, paper-clipped to the page. 2 of the faces I recognized from my time overseas. Men who had vanished mid-operation, written off as dead or captured. But here they were, accounted for, relocated, given new names and new countries. Laura had been running ghost extractions. And then I saw the last page. No photo, just a code name. Mine. The date was 3 days from now. The location column read simply, "Final." I didn't need the rest explained. Cole and Laura hadn't just been trying to box me in. They were setting me up for removal from the map entirely. Not a kill in the street, but a clean disappearance. No body, no record, just gone. That explained the bait, the false schedule, the controlled sightings. They weren't trying to eliminate me in a firefight. They were trying to fold me into the very system I used to run for other people. Turn me into one of the ghosts. I put the ledger back exactly where I'd found it, closed the cover, and walked out of that room with my pulse steady. Because now, I didn't just have motive. I had proof. Proof that Laura's betrayal wasn't personal or professional. It was both. Proof that Cole's network wasn't just a criminal empire, but a black ops recycling plant for assets the government didn't want to kill openly. And proof that in 3 days, they planned to erase me. I didn't plan on giving them the satisfaction. 3 days was all I needed to burn the whole thing to the ground. 3 days. That's all they'd given me in their ledger. Though I doubt they realized that in my world, 3 days is more than enough to break an empire. Cole and Laura had their plan. Move me into position, keep me in a controlled loop, then vanish me into their ghost pipeline like I'd never existed. My plan was simpler. Burn every bridge they had until the only place left for them to stand was exactly where I wanted them. The first day was about sabotage. I went after their money. Not the cash drops. Those were just surface fuel. I targeted their digital accounts, the ones they thought were untouchable. I still had access to systems most people don't know exist, buried in the architecture of secure networks from my days as the gravekeeper. I didn't drain them. That would have spooked them too soon. Instead, I locked and froze assets at random intervals, creating bottlenecks in their operations. A cargo couldn't leave port without its insurance cleared. A bribe payment to a customs official bounced back without explanation. The Mancinis didn't know where the jam was coming from, but they knew they were losing time. And time is the most expensive currency in a moving operation. The second day was about dismantling trust. Using the comm units I'd tagged in the storage yard, I started feeding false intel into their network. Not enough to blow my cover, but enough to pit one crew against another. I let slip that certain drop points had been compromised, that a rival family was moving in on shipments. The result was predictable paranoia. Cole's voice over the intercepted comms was sharper now, no longer the calm of a man in full control. He was moving people in defensive patterns, pulling key players closer to the lodge. Exactly what I wanted. Laura, however, didn't flinch in the recordings I caught. Her tone was measured, almost detached, as if she'd already factored chaos into the equation. I knew that voice. I trusted that voice once. Now it was a weapon she was using against me. The third day was personal. By then, they'd pulled almost everyone back to the lodge. The outposts were lightly guarded, the streets quiet. I used that gap to pay a visit to Vince Rocco, their enforcer and one of the first people I'd seen at Laura's side. I caught him leaving a Mancinione garage, alone for once. I tailed him for 10 minutes, then hit his car with an EMP charge at a blind intersection. It died instantly, coasting to a stop. He stepped out, scanning the street, his hand hovering near his waistband. I was already behind him, one arm around his neck, the other pressing cold steel to his temple. "Tell me where Cole's next move is," I growled in his ear. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. The tremor in his hands told me enough. Fear. Real fear. I didn't kill him. I left him unconscious in the driver's seat with a simple message carved into the dashboard. 3 days ends tomorrow. When word of that reached Cole, he'd know the clock had flipped. No more hunting me. No more waiting for the ledger's date. I'd be coming for him before his window opened. That night, I returned to the hills. From the same creekside entry, I watched the lodge through a thermal scope. More guards now, tighter patterns. Trucks parked in defensive angles. Laura appeared twice, once on the deck, speaking to Cole, and once crossing the clearing toward the cargo containers. Her posture was still sharp, still deliberate. No sign she knew how close I was. But I saw something in Cole's stance. The way he kept looking toward the tree line. He felt it. The pressure. The closing walls. The ledger had been their advantage, a plan on paper, dates they thought they controlled. I turned it into a countdown neither of them could stop. Tomorrow, the final day, would be the debt collection. Not in blood, not at first. In fear. Because I wanted Cole, Ward, and Laura to understand, before I ended them, that every step they'd taken to erase me had only walked them into the hands of the one man they should never have woken. And when they saw me, it wouldn't be the husband she once knew. It would be the gravekeeper. The last day began before dawn. Fog lay thick in the hills, clinging to the trees and muting the sound of my steps. I'd spent the night prepping gear I hadn't touched since my last sanctioned kill. By the time I approached the lodge, every piece of steel and polymer on my body felt like an extension of my own will. The plan was simple. Overwhelm them fast. Cut off escape. Control the field before Cole or Laura could dictate a single move. I moved in from the west slope, where the lodge's cameras had the widest blind spot. The thermal scope confirmed what I'd hoped. Cole had thinned the outer ring of guards to reinforce the front. That left only 2 on the back perimeter. The first guard died without a sound, knife between the ribs, hand over his mouth. The second barely had time to turn before a suppressed round found his throat. I dragged both bodies into the shadows. From there, I planted the first layer of charges on the cargo containers behind the lodge. When they went off, they'd do more than destroy the weapons inside. They'd block the clearing and seal off the easiest escape route. I made my way to the deck, crouched below the windows, and listened. Cole's voice. Low, controlled, but sharper than I'd ever heard it. He's coming today. He knew. He'd been readying them all morning. Laura's reply was colder. Then we end it before he gets close. She wasn't afraid. That bothered me. I moved to the side entrance, bypassed the lock, and slipped inside. The scent of cedar and gun oil filled the air. The hall was dim, lit only by the early lights spilling through the front windows. 2 guards came around the corner. 2 shots. 2 bodies down. I was in the main hall before their blood hit the floor. Cole was at the far end, rifle in hand. Laura stood beside him, pistol drawn. Her eyes met mine across the room. No shock. No hesitation. You should have stayed gone, she said. I didn't answer. The charges outside went off. A triple thunderclap that shook the walls. Shouts erupted as men scrambled toward the rear. Smoke and dust rolled in through the shattered windows. Cole raised his rifle, but I was already moving. The first burst of gunfire chewed into the pillar behind me as I dove into cover. I returned fire, forcing him back toward the stairwell. Laura didn't run. She advanced. Each step measured, pistol steady. I fired once, clipping the wall near her shoulder. She didn't flinch. The sound of boots on wood told me more guards were pouring in from the side halls. I moved fast, taking them down as they entered, using the pillars for cover, my shots precise. When the smoke cleared, it was just the three of us. Cole stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. You were always the best, Gravekeeper. But this time, I didn't let him finish. One shot through his chest armor, the impact staggering him, then another to the head. He dropped instantly, the rifle clattering to the floor. Laura didn't move to help him. She just looked at his body, then at me. Do you even know why? She asked. I didn't speak. She lowered her pistol slightly, almost like she was giving up. You were never meant to be a husband, Ryan. You were meant to be a weapon. And weapons don't retire. We just repurposed them. The words were poison, designed to dig under the skin. But I'd heard worse in darker rooms. I stepped toward her. You killed my brother. Her expression didn't change. He heard something he shouldn't have. It was cleaner this way. The rage was there, sharp and hot, but it didn't control me. I raised the pistol, and for a moment, I saw her finally lose the mask. Not fear, but the faintest flicker of doubt. She tried one last move, a quick raise of the gun, but I was faster. One shot. Center mass. She dropped the pistol, staggered back against the wall, and slid to the floor. I stood over her as she bled, her breathing ragged. You should have known what this name meant, I said. Her lips moved. Maybe she tried to speak. Maybe it was just the last breath leaving her. By the time the smoke cleared and the fire from the containers reached the lodge's walls, I was already gone. I didn't take the ledger. I left it burning with everything else. Some debts are better erased than settled. By nightfall, the lodge was ash and twisted steel. No bodies recovered. No survivors to tell the story. And me? I vanished back into the quiet. Somewhere out there, the people who once used my code name would hear whispers about the Hill Fire, the missing Mancinis, the collapse of an arms network that stretched across continents. They'd wonder if the Gravekeeper was still alive. And if they were smart, they'd hope they never found out. If this story had you on edge, imagine what's coming next. The Gravekeeper's world is built on blood, betrayal, and unfinished business, and there's always another name on his list. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join me for the next mission before it's too late.